On Thursday, they signed an oath to give, quote, impartial justice at the trial. Joining me now, Senator Bob Menendez of New Jersey. He's the ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Senator, good to see you again. And I want to get to the impeachment trial in a minute, but there's a whole lot of news that is relevant to the committees on which you serve. 24 hours after Ukraine announced that it would open an investigation into the alleged surveillance of Ambassador Marie Yovanovitch, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo told a radio program today that, quote, I suspect that much of what's been reported will ultimately prove wrong, but our obligation, my obligation as Secretary of State, is to make sure we evaluate, investigate. The allegations, whether they prove correct or wrong, Senator, are remarkable, that a private citizen who's now running for office was involved in the surveillance of the U.S. ambassador in Ukraine. What do you make of this whole thing?
Well, it's pretty outrageous that Ambassador Yovanovitch may very well have been surveillanced, and if you look at some of the language, and if there's any seriousness to that language, may have been at risk. And if you recall, Ali, when she testified before the House Intelligence Committee, she said that, did she feel intimidated? And she said she did. And so the reality is, that's why I call this immediately, as a ranking Democrat on the Foreign Relations Committee, for an investigation on this. And it shouldn't take the secretary to be on some conservative talk show to finally say he's going to look at it. That's the responsibility of the Secretary of State and the Department of State, to protect all of our diplomats, to review and investigate any challenges or threats that may have come against them. And I expect a full briefing on it to understand what did the department know, what did it do, and what is it doing now.
Senator, let's talk about the situation in Iran and the threats to the United States. There was some talk that the State Department canceled briefings on Wednesday that were scheduled to be focused on the current situation with Iran. Do you have an update on a briefing from this administration?
No. And we have urgently told the administration that this is not something that they can continue to postpone. I've sent that message directly to the State Department. Even Chairman Risch, the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, has also told them they need to come forward. We are in the midst of the, probably in the next week or two, in between impeachment, discussing a war powers resolution, including one that passed the House, that will be considered by the Senate. We cannot make critical decisions about war and peace, which is about life and death, without the critical information necessary. And so that's why we want the State Department, Department of Defense, intelligence community to come before us and to answer critical questions about where we're at and where we're headed with Iran.
And more broadly, we've heard that the Office of the Director of National Intelligence has pushed to not hold hearings regarding the threats that the United States faces from around the world. I guess I need you to explain to me what the American people and members of Congress lose if we don't have these hearings.
Well, we lose the insight as to what's the real threat. You know, first of all, as someone who went to that intelligence briefing on the elimination of Soleimani, I asked three critical questions. What was the critical intelligence that led you to believe that there was an imminent attack? Secondly, what was the nature of the attack, the targets? And thirdly, what led you to believe the intelligence that, in fact, the elimination of Soleimani alone would eliminate the threat? And I didn't get the answers to that, and many other members did not get critical answers. And I never heard, in that briefing that embassies specifically were under threat. So we need to know, in fact, what is the threat posture for our embassies in the region and beyond, if there is a legitimate and serious threat.
But there's a sense,
and we need diplomatic security to speak to it as well.
There's a sense among some supporters of the president that it is unpatriotic for Democrats or others to be questioning the rationale behind taking out somebody with a resume like Qasem Soleimani's. And it's strangely undemocratic to suggest that questioning any decision taken by any of you or the president it's undemocratic to suggest it's undemocratic.
Well, absolutely. Look, even some of my Republican colleagues, Mike Lee and Rand Paul, who are generally very supportive, strongly supportive of the president, were outraged at that proposition. The very essence of the Constitution, Article 1, is the creation of Congress and its oversight as a separate co-equal branch of government. We represent collectively the American people, and as such, we need to have the critical information to make decisions and cast votes intelligently. So questioning, in fact, what was the policy, what was the information, what was the intelligence, leads you to understand not only the decision in that case, but the ramifications of it moving forward.
Senator, what are you doing to prepare for the impeachment trial?
Well, I am looking forward to the filing of briefs, which are supposed to take place by the House, I believe, on Saturday, and by the President on Monday. I've asked my staff to get me those briefs as soon as they are prepared. I'll be looking at the trial briefs that both sides are presenting. I obviously will be looking at the House report that was issued in support of the articles of impeachment, and then be prepared to listen to the testimony. And I do hope that there will be testimony, because as any American knows, you don't have to be a lawyer for this. If you served on a jury, if you were involved as a plaintiff, if you were involved as a witness in a trial, you know that trials are about witnesses and documents that cast relevant information on the issue before the court. And so in this case, relevant information is relevant information as to whether or not the president did, in fact, use his powers for political purposes, inviting a foreign country to engage in our elections that undermines our national security and ultimately inure to his benefit, as well as obstructing Congress in its Article 1 functions, which is the right to have access to people and documents to make those critical decisions we just talked about.
Senator, good to see you again. Thank you for joining me. Senator Bob Menendez of New Jersey.